Well, hi, everyone. I'm Andy with Let's Fix This. In addition to my role with Let's Fix This, I also happen to serve as the executive director for a national organization called the National Association of Nonpartisan Reformers, which is kind of an umbrella group for a lot of different organizations around the country that are working on electoral and democracy reforms like the ones we're going to be discussing tonight. And so because of that, this is like, while I'm a huge proponent of Oklahoma and civic engagement in general, I also kind of live in this other world where I'm working with folks around the country on these different reforms. And that means that I get exposed to a lot of ideas and a lot of efforts, grassroots groups, big national campaigns, whatever it is, that helps, I think, kind of frame things differently. And I'll tell you what I learn week in and week out in doing that work is that things are not as bad in Oklahoma as a lot of folks might fear or feel sometimes. I think we are not that different from a lot of other states, and in some ways better positioned to make some changes about how our elections are function and like how they're administered here in ways that can be really helpful. And so the things that I want to kind of talk about first, and if you'll indulge me just to kind of run through them and give you a very brief synopsis of each one, is I'll do that first, and then, like I said, towards the end, I want to have an open discussion about it. The first thing, just off the bat, is straight ticket voting. I know most folks read the Oklahoma Watch story or saw in the news elsewhere following this election. Just like in elections past, where the number of folks, the percentage of voters who voted straight ticket. And, often these things are framed in like a partisan way, and I'm going to try not to tonight. One, because we're a 501c3, we're a nonpartisan organization, but we do want people to vote, and we want people's votes to matter and to be, equal, one person, one vote, and we want the voting populace to be informed and engaged to the extent they can. So I'm not going to talk about, say, winning and losing, but I will talk about the outcome of elections, right? Not just who the candidates are, but the policy that comes from the type of candidates that win elections or that can win elections under different systems. So back up, straight ticket voting. The trend for the last several elections has been that has been an increase in the number of voters using straight ticket voting. And right now it tends to be more Republicans than Democrats who use it. Historically, as with everything, that has not always been the case in Oklahoma. For 100 years, Democrats ruled Oklahoma and voted straight ticket in high numbers back then. The last 30 years or so, the pendulum has swung the other way. And, everyone's trying to guess when it swings all the way, and if it'll swing back, we don't know, right? 100 years is a long time on the way it was before. I have some reason to think that it's about as far over as it can go, but it might stay there for a while. But there are some other, factors at play. A lot of folks point to straight ticket voting as I think the thing, or they fear that that's the thing that is causing one party to win more elections than the other. And I'll tell you, I don't think so, right? Straight ticket voting is a convenience feature, right? It is there for folks who want to vote for all candidates of a certain party to check one box instead of 4 or 5 or 6 or however many there is. If we removed straight ticket voting, I think it would just take a statutory change. So I think the legislature could do it, but I don't think it would change the outcome of any elections, at least not many elections, right? Because the folks who vote straight ticket are highly inclined to vote with that party, regardless of if they've got to check one box or 6. And I think that's the case, right? So I think there's a lot of consternation about it because it seems, I don't know, lazy or something. And that may be, but I'm here to tell you, I don't think that is the golden ticket that a lot of folks identified as. It happens to be the thing in the news right now because it's one of the data points that is quickly known after an election. Another data point that is known is turnout, right? Then the percentage of voters who have turned out. And this, I will say, is a super important metric, right? In Oklahoma, there are about 3 million eligible voters. Only about 2 million of them are registered, and only around 1 million of them vote, right? In round numbers. And in fact, this election in 2022, while our turnout was, right at 50% of registered voters, right? So about 1 million people, that seems low, right? And compared to other states, it is low. It puts us in the bottom 10 for turnout. But compared to similar elections in Oklahoma, right? Past elections where the governor was up for re-election, an incumbent governor for re-election, it was actually a pretty high turnout. It was one of the highest turnouts because those elections where the governor's up for re-election as an incumbent, it's hard to overcome that incumbent advantage and name recognition. And so the fact that turnout was as high as it was at 50%, it based on history of the last 30-ish years, 32 years, turnout should have only been around like 44 to 46%. So that's like roughly 130,000 more people than what we would have expected. And if you follow me closely or listen to our podcast, you know that earlier this year, I was estimating that turnout would be 989,000, and that's based on historical precedent. It was quite a bit higher than that. It was about 200,000 more than that. So there is some good news in there. Turnout was actually higher this year than would have been expected for similar elections, right? Now, in 2 years, we'll see a much higher turnout because it's a presidential election, right? So in terms of raw numbers and even registered voters or percentage, it'll be higher. But I think that matters. Now, we could do a lot to improve turnout. And maybe in some kind of ideal world, right? This is how I frame it, is that everyone who's eligible is registered and everyone who's registered votes, right? 100% registration, 100% turnout. And if that was the case, then we would know what Oklahomans truly want for their elected outcomes. But that's not the case. I mean, right now we have roughly half of who's registered, which is only a third of who's eligible, making the decisions. And that means we don't really have an accurate representation of everything. Now, that's never going to happen, right? Even with compulsory voting, not everyone votes. Like I think in Australia, like you have to vote, or you have to show up and not vote, but you have to go. There's some kind of compulsory element to it. And even those systems, not everybody votes. In Oklahoma, a few things we could do to make voting easier and more accessible. One is to implement online voter registration, right? That has been passed, that is in the law. The only thing that we're waiting on, according to the Secretary of State and the election board, is for an electronic, pathway or verification process with the Department of Public Safety so they can verify your driver's license, right? So, or verify your identity. So right now, if you fill out I usually have a voter reg form here. You fill out a voter reg form, you have to put your name and address, and then either your driver's license or the last four of your social. And then you mail that form in, and they're supposed to check it on the back end to ensure that you are who you say you are. I'm not actually sure they do that now, the check, but that's the way it's supposed to work. And so the way they're going to handle that electronically is that you put in either of those numbers into the form, and then it checks it against the state's databases. And I guess there's as with most things with our tech infrastructure, there's a gap there. Senator Julia Kurt has run legislation the last couple of years to try to force a deadline on that. Those bills have not gone anywhere. I've heard rumors that it might be in place by the end of this year or by the end of next year. So we might have it in time for 2024, but who knows? That really is one of those deadlines that I don't have a good feel, and it takes a lot of insider information. I think we all know that tech interfaces are complicated, especially with old legacy systems like our state uses for everything. So I know that they are working on it. And so I think I think we'll see some movement on that, hopefully in the next, we'll say 6 or 8 months, at least some news about it. I know several journalists are working on it now. Cole, I see your comment there about how it's written now that the electronic system would only allow people with driver's licenses or state IDs to register online. which would be a big gap, right? For all the folks who don't have a driver's license nor a state ID, folks where English is not their first language, or gosh, even their second language in some cases. There's a lot of barriers to that. Would it be better than what we have now? Yes. Like, it would be an improvement. And the name of the game in politics and government, right, is incremental change. In fact, Mayor David Holt, Oklahoma City Mayor David Holt, made a joke about that on election night at our event, that, what do most voters want? We want incremental change at a pace that is reasonable, but that's not very flashy and doesn't, win elections for a slogan. So I think we'll get there. So online voter reg would be huge and would make voting much more accessible, especially to young people, which would make elections, I think, more competitive statewide, right? Young people turn out at lower rates because they're registered at lower rates. So that would be a big help. Secondly, I think we could see automatic voter registration. This could also be done by the legislature. Right now it is optional. So if you go get a state ID or a driver's license, they ask you if you want to register to vote. But if they required it, or if they did it automatically and then said, we're going to register you and you can opt out if you don't want it. And they could also apply that to any other state service. So if you got a hunting and fishing license, if you applied for Medicaid, if you applied for SNAP, any kind of disability, any kind of state assistance, they can make that unified there. They could even take it a step further and mail applications out to folks, right? That's a whole different ballgame. So I think those two things could make a huge deal. We'll see. I think we'll get online voter reg sooner. Automatic, I think, is something that we should talk about more. We should talk to our legislators about this and say, this makes sense. Why not just make it the default? People don't want to vote, that's fine, but we should at least encourage everyone to register. That's one barrier out of the way. And why wouldn't the government want input from everybody? So that's something. Whatever, we're on third now. So we've talked about straight ticket voting and kind of voting reforms. Related to that, Oklahoma has pretty, relatively generous mail voting options, right? We have a no excuse absentee, so anyone can request a mail ballot and send it in. You don't have to have a specific disability or other reason for it, which is different than a lot of states. The gold standard now is states like Colorado and Oregon, Washington, that have universal mail voting. So every voter is mailed a ballot automatically. And from talking to folks at the National Vote at Home Institute, that's what they're certainly advocating for. And they found that in the tipping point is about when, once half of voters are receiving ballots, like maybe from their own request that they're getting ballots, at that point, it is cost effective for the state to just go ahead and send a ballot to everybody, because you're having to print so many ballots and do so much mail anyway. There's a discount on that bulk mail. I'm waiting to find out what the actual cost would be for Oklahoma. It would be not huge, right? My guess is around 2 to 4 million per election, which is not insignificant, but not insurmountable in a state budget of $8 billion, or appropriated budget of $8 billion, especially because we don't have elections all the time everywhere. So there's some consolidation we could do on election days, and then universal voting would just make it easier and more convenient for everyone to vote, especially if that was coupled with the removal of the notary requirement, right? So Oklahoma mail ballots require someone to notarize your ballot, which is not insurmountable, but super inconvenient for most people. I mean, you can drive through your bank, you can call someone like me who's a notary and kind of puts it on social media. So definitely doable, but it's just a hassle. And they have that law under the guise of security, but lots of states, big states much larger than us, have universal mail ballots without notarization requirements and have just as secure elections, right? That's not because they have to match those ballots back. The trade-off would be, depending on how they handle the delivery and the delivery dates, if they kept it where it is now, where you have to have it in before the election, in theory, we should get election results just as quick as we do now. You'll notice some states took a few days longer to count all of their ballots. That's pretty normal for most states. We're a little unique that we get ours counted so quickly. But there might be a minor trade-off there. I think it's worth it because I think we'd see higher return. And in fact, states that enacted universal mail ballots have a much higher turnout number, right? A higher percentage of voters vote when you can just mail it in and it's easier. So I think that's a big thing, again, that we as the voters should talk about. And then I've got three more. One is gerrymandering. Some of you remember in 2019 and 2020, when our group, Let's Fix This, and the League of Women Voters and some others mounted an effort to end gerrymandering in Oklahoma. In case you don't know, gerrymandering is the drawing of political maps for usually some kind of partisan gain, right? So as it stands right now, Oklahoma's state legislative districts, and congressional districts are all drawn by the state legislature. So politicians get to draw their own districts. And there's an obvious conflict of interest with that they draw them to protect themselves, their friends, the incumbents, and draw them in a way that their party in power, who gets to draw the maps, will draw them so their party can stay in power. Again, this was done by Democrats for 100 years. It's done by Republicans now. In Oklahoma, in states like Illinois, the Democrats gerrymandered up there. It's not a partisan issue. It's a power issue. It's about maintaining power. Unfortunately, at the point that we are about to start collecting signatures in 2020, COVID showed up and shut down all signature collection, and we just didn't have time. We ran out of time before we had to get on the ballot, so we didn't get to collect any signatures. We could revisit this though before the next redistricting cycle, which will be in 2031, right? So 9 years from now. And we have the benefit of seeing other states like Michigan and a few others who implemented redistricting commissions for this last cycle. And in Michigan, is a tremendous story where they passed an independent redistricting commission in 2018. So the census happened in 2020. They got fair maps drawn by this commission in 2021. And then this year, that led to a pretty competitive legislative and congressional slate. And voters then realized the power that we as voters have in Oklahoma and in Michigan. They passed three pretty huge ballot measures kind of on the back of that. They realized that, hey, if we want to build a better state, we can do it. And here's the story of what we're doing. So they implemented some abortion protections in the state constitution, right, with some limits on it, but basically put it in the Constitution, some campaign finance reforms, a few other things. It was a really big deal. So that's something that I think there is appetite for. I know several names and faces on the call tonight. I know we're active in our campaign back in 2019, and it's something that's still on my radar. I think there's some discussion that we want to look at other states about what worked and what didn't a little more closely. I have a conference next week where I'll be at, and Sam Wong, who is the director of the Princeton Gerrymandering Project, is going to speak about this very issue. I'm looking forward to talking with him and kind of picking his brain on it to find out exactly, what works and what doesn't, and is this something that we should really start building towards again? My gut says yes, but I also like to have data in my back pocket to justify that. So that's a big thing. In Oklahoma, I will say, what happened this cycle is that the legislature drew the maps. The state legislative maps are about as competitive and fair as one could feasibly draw them. The process was more transparent than in the past, though still not super transparent. And the congressional map leaves a lot to be desired. We have 5 congressional districts which should shake out to like one for Oklahoma City, one for Tulsa, and then the other three dividing up the rural areas in general terms. Of course, that's not the case. Oklahoma City, they have divided between three different congressional districts. Oklahoma County divided between three different districts. So like I live at 23rd and May, or I'm at 26th, but just across the street, just across 23rd, that congressional district includes the Panhandle, right? So they carved out all of the like the bulk of the Latino population from Oklahoma County and put it in the same congressional district with the Panhandle. And if I'd been a little more thoughtful, I would have had a graph or a map to show you right now, but I can send that in an email. So we'll come back to gerrymandering, maybe in a couple of years. It's my suggestion. If you're really passionate about it, let's get to work. We can start working on it now. And then the last two things are both having to do with how we vote. One is open primaries, which I think is probably the most substantial change that we can make right now to our systems. And I know that there's some folks working on it here in our state, and as well as some national attention. And so that's really important. So the easiest way, I think, to explain open primaries is, well, first to talk about closed primaries, right? So Oklahoma is a semi-open state or a semi-closed state, where when you go to a primary election in Oklahoma right now, Republicans can vote in the Republican primary, and then Democrats vote in the Democratic primary, and Democratic Party chooses to allow independents to vote in their primary. And the Libertarians, if they had more than one Libertarian in the same race, would have their own closed primary. And so it means that in races like for, let's say, the state insurance commissioner, which was decided in the Republican primary, only Republicans got to vote, no Democrats, no independents, no Libertarians got to vote in that. But there was no other opponent, and so that was it. So it was decided, that official was decided in a primary election where half of the electorate was not even allowed to vote. And I heard a friend describe primary elections as like a popularity contest for a private party, a private group, but we pay for them with all of our tax dollars. And honestly, primary elections, as we know them, are a relatively new invention or tool in our democracy. It's not the way we've always done it in America or even in Oklahoma. And so there's some things we can make differently. And I know one of the folks that's a pretty strong proponent of open primaries is Oklahoma City Mayor David Holt. And I'm going to try to share my screen here and play a little video. And this is from the election night show, which is our event on election night we had at Tower Theater. And let me play just a few minutes of this.
So what can we do to improve on that? And you mentioned specifically the way that our elections are held. I know that when you were in the state Senate, you ran a bill for open primaries. Do you think reforms like that, like the ones I mentioned that are on the ballot in Nevada tonight, do you think those kinds of things can change the incentives enough for politicians to move us forward?
Absolutely. So, as you know, you're teeing this up for a reason. I'm an evangelist for this topic. If you think that you like the political culture of Oklahoma City and you wonder why it's different at other levels, it is not necessarily just the people you're electing, it's how you're electing them. In Oklahoma City, right, all the candidates appear on the ballot. It's technically nonpartisan, but I don't think that's the most critical aspect. I think the most critical aspect is that all the candidates are on the ballot and all the voters get to see all of the candidates, right? So like I as a candidate have to face everybody, or in my case, I believe get to face everybody, and the voters get a chance to vote for everybody. You know, we have a different form of electing people at the state and federal levels, and so, you know, I don't exactly know how you're registered, Andy, but I'm guessing you never got to see Mick Cornett when he ran for governor 4 years ago. You never got a chance to vote for or against him. And that's just not right. And it's incentivizing candidates to, you know, to play to the extremes. I mean, we all know this. We all see it every single day. And instead, in Oklahoma City, you're incentivized to create a coalition across partisan lines. When I stood at First National Center in February at my reelection, and I looked out at that watch party, I could see a group of people that I knew to be Republicans, Democrats, and independents. And that may be true tonight at this watch party, but that's not going to be true at many other watch parties you go to tonight in this country. And it needs to be. I mean, you need to get back to where there's incentives for that. So that's never going to change at the legislature. You've got to, take that to an initiative or something, and you got to do it 50 times, unfortunately. But there are states that already have those processes in place, and I think they're getting better results. I mean, it may not be obvious on its face, but they're getting candidates that are more closer to the middle, who are reaching across party lines. And actually, I think in Oklahoma and in Utah tonight, there's an interesting dynamic where really you have a couple races where it kind of happened that way through a lot of manipulation.
Yes.
In Utah, you have a Republican who changed to an independent, and the Democrats didn't field a candidate, so they basically are presenting two Republicans, one moderate, one MAGA, And here in Oklahoma, you have a Republican who switched parties to Democrat, and so you're basically presenting that. And in states like Utah and Oklahoma, you're going to end up with basically a Republican. You just want somebody who's not crazy, So top two or top four or ranked choice, whatever, as long as everybody sees all the candidates and all the candidates have to face all the voters, you will get better outcomes.
So what Mayor Holt's talking about there is open primaries, right? And elsewhere in the conversation, he talks about there's different ways to do open primaries, but Oklahoma already has open primaries for municipal elections, right? And school board. When you go vote for your mayor or a city council member, all the candidates are listed there. City elections don't have party affiliation of the candidates, but you could. But everybody gets to vote, right? So if you go vote for the mayor of your city, all the mayoral candidates are there, and whether they have party affiliation or not, you probably know how they lean, how they affiliate, based on their platform and their messaging and their campaign. But everybody gets to vote, and you pick your favorite, right? The one you want to win. And then if someone gets more than 50%, they win. And if no one gets more than 50%, if there's then the top two go to a runoff, and then the winner of that one wins, right? So that's a top two open primary. Our city elections are nonpartisan, but you could easily do it as a partisan race. And that's essentially what California does, right? They have a top two open primary. Everybody runs, and the top two go on to the general if there's not a clear winner. And I know Mayor Holt said that's what he would advocate for Oklahoma. There are other models that are similar. And at the beginning of that clip, I referenced Nevada and Alaska. Both those states have adopted. Alaska's used it now. Nevada just approved it. They have to approve it again, is how their process works. But they approved it once to be essentially a final five open primary. So their system is a combination of open primaries and ranked choice voting. So in the primary, all the candidates run, everyone's listed with their party affiliation, and you vote for the one you like the best. And then the top five vote getters, not just the top two, the top five, all go on to the general election. And then when you come vote for the general election, you rank them in order: first, second, third preference. If you just like one, you just put first and you go home, but you have the ability to rank them. So if you like someone the most, if you like someone else like the next most, right, then you can rank them that way. And that allows everyone's preference to be fully considered and everyone's vote to count a little bit more. And so ranked choice is the last thing I was going to talk about. And in fact, I accidentally scheduled this meeting tonight at the same time as Rank the Vote, Oklahoma's monthly statewide meeting, which I should know better. I'm on their board. I just missed the email. But there is a group, Rank the Vote Oklahoma, who is working on ranked choice voting in our state. And again, that's one of the links that I'll send to you later, along with a video from a woman named Catherine Gale. She is entrepreneur, a family entrepreneur, businesswoman, and I'll put this in the chat because I have it pulled up. She founded an organization called the Institute for Political Innovation. She wrote this book that's right here behind me called The Politics Industry. She's one of the authors of that. And it's about the Final Five system I was just describing and how it changes the incentives for candidates to, instead of running for their party base, right, the most fervent of their members, that they really are incentivized to appeal to the rest of us, the most of us that are in the middle, that want politics to be less partisan, to be more representative and fair, and like, let's just say normal, for whatever that means. I think there's a lot of power there. Okay, so just to recap the things that I kind of went through: straight ticket voting, automatic voter reg, online voter reg, universal mail voting, independent redistricting, right, or ending gerrymandering, open primaries, and ranked choice voting. Now those things, I lost count, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 things. Any one of those could have pretty significant implications for Oklahoma by making our elections more competitive and more representative of the voters. Done in concert with one another, they can be immensely powerful in shifting how things happen in our state. And I'd love to hear your thoughts on that. If any of these stand out to you more than others, please let me know.